In 1929, a Turkish naval officer cleaning out his grandfather's library discovered something that should have been impossible. A 500-year-old map showing Antarctica's coastline in perfect detail, 3 centuries before the continent was officially discovered, and revealing the landmass beneath ice that's supposedly been frozen for millions of years. The Piri Reis map ignited a mystery that has consumed researchers for decades, but it was just the first crack in a wall of deception. Satellite scans now reveal massive geometric structures beneath miles of Antarctic ice. Military expeditions launch in absolute secrecy. Ancient texts describe impossible southern civilizations, and anyone who gets too close to the truth finds their research defunded, their reputations destroyed, or worse. Tonight, we're following this evidence trail wherever it leads, from monastery archives to Pentagon black sites, to uncover what may be the most suppressed discovery in human history. The dusty shelves of Topkapi Palace in Istanbul held more secrets than anyone imagined. Among the Ottoman treasures lay a collection of maps that would challenge everything historians thought they knew about ancient knowledge. When scholars first examined these cartographic relics in the early 20th century, they discovered something that defied explanation: detailed geographical information that shouldn't have existed for centuries. Picture the moment when researchers realized what they were looking at. Here, drawn with remarkable precision on gazelle skin parchment, was the outline of South America's eastern coast, complete with rivers and mountain ranges that European explorers wouldn't map until decades later. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. At the bottom of this ancient chart lay the unmistakable form of Queen Maud Land, the northern coastline of Antarctica, rendered with an accuracy that matched modern satellite surveys. The map bore the signature of Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral and cartographer who completed his work in 1513 AD. According to his own notes inscribed on the parchment, he had compiled this masterpiece from over 20 source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. But here's what made historians' blood run cold. The southern continent depicted on his chart wouldn't be officially discovered by European explorers until 1820. How could a Turkish mapmaker in 1513 AD possess such detailed knowledge of lands that remained hidden from the world for another 3 centuries? The precision wasn't approximate or lucky guesswork. The coastline matched modern measurements with startling accuracy, showing bays, inlets, and geographical features that contemporary Antarctic research confirmed. Even more puzzling, the landmass appeared ice-free, revealing the rocky terrain beneath what we now know as the Antarctic ice sheet. Professor Charles Hapgood of Keene College became obsessed with this mystery in the 1960s. His analysis revealed that the southern portion of the Piri Reis chart showed Antarctica not as the frozen wasteland we know today, but as it would appear if the ice completely melted. The implications sent shockwaves through the academic community. If the map was accurate, it suggested that someone had surveyed and charted Antarctica when it was ice-free, a condition that, according to mainstream geology, hadn't existed for millions of years. But the Turkish admiral's work wasn't an isolated anomaly. Deep in the archives of European libraries, researchers began uncovering other impossible maps. The Orontius Phineas map of 1531 showed the entire Antarctic continent in remarkable detail, complete with mountain ranges, rivers, and coastal features. The Mercator map of 1569 depicted the southern landmass as 2 separate islands connected by waterways, a configuration that perfectly matched what lay beneath the ice, according to modern seismic surveys. Each discovery raised more questions than it answered. The Buache map of 1739 showed Antarctica divided by a waterway running clear across the continent. When researchers compared this to seismic data from the International Geophysical Year, they found that beneath the ice, Antarctica was indeed split by a body of water, a fact not officially confirmed until the 1950s. How had Philippe Boissy, working in pre-industrial France, possessed such knowledge? The cartographers themselves provided few clues. Their notes referenced even older sources, maps that had been copied and recopied through the centuries. Piri Reis mentioned charts from the time of Alexander the Great and even older Phoenician sources. The trail led backward through time, suggesting that this knowledge had ancient origins, far more ancient than conventional history allowed. Academic institutions initially dismissed these findings as coincidence or misinterpretation. The maps, they argued, must depict other land masses or represent artistic imagination rather than geographical reality. But as more examples surfaced, the pattern became undeniable. Multiple independent sources, separated by centuries and continents, all seem to possess detailed knowledge of Antarctica's ice-free coastline. The breakthrough came when researchers began comparing these ancient charts to modern seismic and satellite data. The correlation was too precise to ignore. Features shown on medieval maps matched geological formations discovered only through sophisticated 20th century technology. Mountain ranges appeared exactly where seismic surveys later confirmed they existed beneath miles of ice. Coastal indentations aligned perfectly with underwater terrain mapping. What made this even more extraordinary was the mathematical sophistication required to create such accurate maps. The projection techniques used to translate the curved surface of the Earth onto flat parchment demonstrated advanced understanding of spherical geometry. These weren't crude approximations, but precise cartographic achievements that wouldn't be matched in European mapmaking until the Renaissance. Some researchers proposed that ancient civilizations possessed far more advanced geographical knowledge than previously imagined. Perhaps forgotten seafaring cultures had mapped the world's coastlines during periods when sea levels and climate conditions differed dramatically from today. The maps might represent the last surviving fragments of a lost golden age of exploration and discovery. Others suggested an even more radical possibility. What if these ancient cartographers had access to aerial or satellite-like perspectives? The accuracy and comprehensive scope of the geographical information seemed to require a bird's-eye view of the continents. Could advanced ancient technologies have provided such vantage points? Or had earlier civilizations developed methods of surveying and mapping that surpassed anything in the historical record? The implications extended far beyond cartography. If ancient peoples possessed detailed knowledge of Antarctica's ice-free terrain, it suggested that the great southern continent had been habitable within human memory. This challenged fundamental assumptions about climate history, human migration patterns, and the development of civilization. It hinted at chapters of human history that had been completely forgotten or deliberately erased. Government agencies and academic institutions began taking notice as the evidence accumulated. Research into these ancient maps became increasingly difficult to pursue. Funding dried up for scholars investigating the anomalies. Libraries restricted access to original documents. The few researchers who continued their work found themselves marginalized within their fields, their findings dismissed without serious consideration. But the maps themselves remained, silent witnesses to impossible knowledge. Each chart told the same story. Someone, sometime in the distant past, had possessed comprehensive and accurate information about lands that wouldn't be rediscovered for centuries. The precision of their work suggested systematic exploration and advanced technological capabilities that shouldn't have existed in the ancient world. The most unsettling aspect wasn't just that these maps existed, but that they seemed to be copies of even older sources. The cartographers' own notes referenced materials from antiquity, suggesting that the knowledge they preserved might stretch back thousands of years. What civilization had possessed such advanced geographical understanding? Why had this knowledge been lost? And what else might these ancient explorers have discovered that remained hidden in the world's archives? As researchers delved deeper into this mystery, they began to uncover hints that the ancient maps were just the beginning. References in classical texts spoke of expeditions to southern lands. Archaeological evidence suggested human presence in Antarctica during periods when the continent should have been uninhabitable. The impossible cartographers had opened a door to questions that would lead investigators into even stranger territory, where the very foundations of accepted history began to crumble. The trail of evidence was leading somewhere unexpected, toward discoveries that would make even the impossible maps seem like minor mysteries compared to what lay hidden beneath Antarctica's ancient ice. The year was 1938, and something was stirring in the Third Reich that went far beyond territorial ambition. While the world watched Hitler's armies march across Europe, a different kind of expedition was secretly preparing for departure, one that would take German explorers to the most remote and inhospitable place on Earth. The official story spoke of scientific research and territorial claims, but the truth was far stranger. Captain Alfred Richer stood on the deck of the MS Schwabenland, watching the last traces of civilization disappear behind them as they headed south toward Antarctica. What he carried in the ship's cargo hold would have seemed like science fiction to most observers. Aircraft equipped with the most advanced cameras of the era, experimental equipment that pushed the boundaries of known technology, and orders sealed with the highest classifications the Reich possessed. The expedition's public mission seemed straightforward enough. Germany needed to establish territorial claims in Antarctica to secure access to whale oil for the war machine. But the resources devoted to this venture told a different story. The Reich had allocated enough funding to equip a small army, not a simple surveying mission. They'd assembled some of the most brilliant minds in German science, specialists in fields that had nothing to do with whaling or territorial mapping. Among the expedition members were experts in ancient languages, archaeologists who specialized in pre-civilization cultures, and physicists whose work delved into theoretical realms that wouldn't become mainstream for decades. Why would a territorial survey require such diverse expertise? The answer lay buried in the classified archives of the Ahnenerbe, Heinrich Himmler's occult research division. The Ahnenerbe had been studying the same impossible maps that would later captivate Professor Hapgood. German researchers had obtained copies of the Piri Reis chart and other ancient cartographic anomalies, but their interpretation differed radically from academic circles. They believed these maps proved the existence of an advanced Aryan civilization that had once ruled the world from bases in the far north and far south. According to the theories that drove this expedition, survivors of the legendary Thule had established colonies in Antarctica before the Great Ice Age. These weren't primitive settlements, but advanced technological centers that had preserved knowledge and artifacts from humanity's golden age. If the theories were correct, discovering these sites could provide the Reich with technological advantages that would make their current weapons seem like toys. The expedition's aircraft began their systematic photographic survey in December of 1938. Flying grid patterns over the designated territory, they captured over 11,000 photographs covering more than 230,000 square miles of Antarctic terrain. But according to crew members who spoke years later, some flights deviated from the official survey routes, following mysterious coordinates that had been calculated from the ancient maps. What those aircraft discovered remains one of the most closely guarded secrets in modern history. The official expedition report, released after the war, described routine geographical features and ice formations, but scattered references in private journals and classified documents hint at discoveries that defied explanation. Crew members wrote of spotting geometric structures jutting from the ice, formations too regular to be natural, but too massive to be modern constructions. The most tantalizing evidence comes from the expedition's photographer, who reportedly captured images of what appeared to be artificial cave openings in the coastal cliffs. These weren't simple ice formations, but carved entrances that seemed to lead deep into the continent's interior. The geometric precision of these openings suggested they were man-made, but their weathered appearance indicated an age that predated known human presence in Antarctica by thousands of years. Even more mysterious were the reports of heat signatures detected by the expedition's experimental thermal equipment. In a land where surface temperatures rarely rose above freezing, the Germans identified multiple locations where warmth emanated from beneath the ice. These thermal anomalies formed patterns that seemed too organized to be natural geothermal activity. They suggested the presence of vast underground complexes that somehow maintained temperature levels suitable for human habitation. The expedition established a base camp they called New Swabia, claiming a territory larger than the German homeland itself. But the construction efforts at this site went far beyond what was needed for a temporary research station. Witness accounts describe excavation work that seemed designed to access underground chambers, drilling operations that probe deep into the ice, and the installation of equipment that served no apparent scientific purpose. German U-boats began making regular supply runs to the Antarctic base, a logistical effort that required enormous resources and planning. These submarines carried more than just food and equipment. According to naval records that surfaced decades later, they transported specialized personnel, advanced technology, and mysterious cargo containers whose contents were never officially documented. The most disturbing aspect of the German Antarctic operations was their apparent connection to the Reich's most secret weapons programs. Scientists involved in rocket development, atomic research, and exotic propulsion experiments were rotated through the Antarctic facility. They returned with new insights that seemed to accelerate their work beyond what conventional research could have achieved. One physicist, captured by Allied forces after the war, spoke under interrogation about ancient principles that had been discovered in the Antarctic ice. He described technological concepts that seemed to blend advanced engineering with principles that resembled what would later be called anti-gravity research. The interrogation transcripts were immediately classified and remain sealed to this day. As the war intensified, the German Antarctic operations expanded rather than contracted. Even as resources became critically scarce on the European front, supply missions to New Swabia continued with remarkable consistency. This suggests that whatever the Germans had discovered, there was considered more valuable than conventional military assets. The base wasn't just a research facility, but appeared to function as a storage and development center for the Reich's most advanced technologies. Witnesses reported seeing aircraft with unconventional designs being tested in the Antarctic skies, craft that moved in ways that defied known aerodynamic principles. Some described vessels that seemed to hover silently above the ice, powered by unknown energy sources. But the most chilling reports concerned the discovery of what expedition members called the old installations. These weren't German constructions, but pre-existing structures that had been found beneath the ice. The descriptions painted a picture of vast underground complexes with architectural features unlike anything in recorded history. The spaces were described as having been designed for beings of unusual height, with ceiling heights and doorway proportions that suggested non-human architects. Inside these ancient chambers, the Germans reportedly discovered artifacts that challenged every assumption about human technological development. Carved stone tablets covered in symbols that resembled no known language, metallic objects that showed no signs of corrosion despite their apparent age, and mechanical devices whose function could only be guessed at. Most disturbing were the preserved remains of beings that didn't match any known human racial characteristics. The expedition's archaeologists worked feverishly to catalogue and understand these discoveries. Their reports, written in a mixture of scientific terminology and mystical speculation, described evidence of a civilization that had achieved technological advancement far beyond anything in recorded history. They spoke of finding maps carved in stone that showed the Earth's continents in configurations that wouldn't be confirmed by modern geology for decades. As the war neared its end, the German Antarctic operations took on an air of desperate urgency. High-ranking Nazi officials, including some of Hitler's inner circle, made secret trips to the base. They weren't fleeing the collapsing Reich, but were apparently overseeing the transfer of critical materials and personnel to the Antarctic facility. The base had evolved from a research outpost into what some witnesses described as a backup capital for the Third Reich. The final months of the war saw a mysterious exodus of German submarines heading south. Many of these vessels were never accounted for by Allied forces, leading to speculation that they had established permanent bases in Antarctica. More disturbing were reports that these submarines carried not just Nazi officials, but also the most dangerous artifacts discovered in the ancient installations. When the war ended, the German Antarctic operations officially ceased, but evidence suggests that the infrastructure remained intact, and that knowledge gained from the ancient discoveries had been carefully preserved. The technological insights gleaned from the archaeological finds had apparently been documented and hidden away, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The true scope of what the Germans discovered in Antarctica may never be fully known. The expedition records were scattered and classified by various Allied intelligence agencies. Many participants took their secrets to the grave, bound by oaths of secrecy that outlasted the Reich itself. But the fragments that have emerged paint a picture of discoveries that could have changed the course of human history. What's most troubling is the possibility that the German expedition wasn't the end of the story, but merely the beginning. The knowledge they gained and the installations they discovered didn't simply vanish with the fall of the Third Reich. Instead, they may have become the foundation for operations that continued long after the war ended, hidden beneath the ice of the world's most remote continent. The ancient maps that had first drawn German attention to Antarctica had proven to be more accurate than anyone imagined. But they had also revealed something far more significant than ice-free coastlines. They had pointed the way to evidence of a lost civilization whose technological achievements made modern science seem primitive by comparison. Admiral Richard Byrd had seen more of the world's unexplored places than perhaps any man alive, but nothing had prepared him for what he would encounter in the Antarctic summer of 1946 to 47. The man who had flown over both poles, mapped vast territories, and led multiple expeditions into the Earth's most remote regions was about to face something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The mission briefing had been unlike anything in Byrd's extensive military career. Operation Highjump wasn't being planned as a typical exploration or scientific venture. The scope was staggering: 4,700 men, 13 ships, and 23 aircraft, the largest expedition ever mounted to Antarctica. The official explanation spoke of training exercises in cold weather conditions and establishing American territorial claims, but the resources allocated suggested something far more urgent. Behind closed doors at the Pentagon, a different conversation was taking place. Intelligence reports had been filtering in since the war's end about German activities in Antarctica that went far beyond what the official records indicated. Captured Nazi documents hinted at discoveries that could pose a threat to American national security. More disturbing were the persistent reports of unaccounted German submarines and the testimony of captured officers who spoke of installations that had survived the Reich's collapse. The timing of Operation Highjump wasn't coincidental. Less than 2 years after Germany's surrender, when the world was struggling to rebuild from the war's devastation, the United States was committing massive resources to what appeared to be a military invasion of Antarctica. The expedition included aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, and icebreakers, a force capable of engaging in serious combat operations. Admiral Byrd commanded this armada with a sense of unease that grew stronger as they approached the Antarctic coast. His private journals, which wouldn't surface for decades, revealed a man grappling with mission parameters that seemed to change as new intelligence arrived. The expedition had been tasked with mapping and photographing the continent, but they were also carrying equipment designed for underground operations and personnel trained in combat engineering. The first signs that something was amiss came during the initial reconnaissance flights. Pilots reported seeing structures protruding from the ice that didn't match any known natural formations. These weren't the crude installations one might expect from German wartime operations, but sophisticated constructions that seemed to have been built for permanence. The geometric precision of these structures suggested architectural principles that were unfamiliar to conventional engineering. Even more disturbing were the reports of aircraft sightings. Pilots described seeing craft that moved with impossible speed and maneuverability, performing aeronautical feats that defied known principles of flight. These weren't conventional aircraft, but objects that seemed to operate according to different physical laws. They appeared and disappeared with startling suddenness, as if they possessed some form of advanced propulsion technology. Captain David Bunger, piloting a seaplane over the coastal regions, reported discovering what he called a land of blue and green lakes and brown hills in an otherwise limitless expanse of ice. This oasis, later known as Bunger Hills, showed signs of geothermal activity that created ice-free areas where vegetation actually grew. But Bunger's classified reports described more than natural phenomena. He claimed to have spotted artificial structures within these warm zones. The expedition's mapping efforts revealed geographical features that didn't appear on any existing charts. Vast cave systems honeycombed the coastal cliffs, many showing evidence of artificial enlargement or construction. These weren't natural ice caves, but engineered spaces that seemed designed for habitation or storage. Some extended so far into the continental interior that expedition teams couldn't determine their full extent. Temperature readings from these underground spaces defied explanation. While surface temperatures remained well below freezing, the cave systems maintained conditions that would allow for human activity without specialized equipment. This wasn't possible through natural geothermal processes alone, suggesting the presence of artificial heating systems of unknown design and power source. The most classified aspects of Operation Highjump involved direct encounters with what expedition members could only describe as advanced technology. Radar operators reported contacts that moved at speeds exceeding anything in the American arsenal. These objects seemed to emerge from beneath the ice or from the ocean depths, perform impossible maneuvers, then disappear as quickly as they had appeared. Fighter pilots scrambled to intercept these mysterious contacts, found themselves outmatched by technology that made their aircraft seem primitive. The objects could accelerate instantly, change direction without apparent momentum effects and climb to altitudes that should have been impossible for any known propulsion system. Most disturbing was their apparent ability to interfere with aircraft electronics, causing instruments to malfunction and engines to fail. Admiral Byrd's personal account of these encounters, recorded in his private journal, described a meeting that changed his understanding of what was possible. According to his notes, he was approached by beings who claimed to represent an advanced civilization that had been monitoring human technological development with growing concern. They expressed particular alarm about humanity's development of nuclear weapons and warned of consequences if such weapons were ever used in large-scale conflict again. The journal entries, dismissed by mainstream historians as fantasy or fabrication, described a vast underground civilization that had existed beneath Antarctica for thousands of years. These beings claimed to be descendants of an advanced culture that had survived various global catastrophes by retreating to subterranean strongholds. They possessed technology that seemed almost magical compared to the 1940s human achievements. But the most shocking claim in Byrd's private records was that this civilization had been in contact with German expeditions during the war. The advanced aircraft that expedition members were encountering weren't entirely of unknown origin. They represented a fusion of ancient technology with German engineering. The Reich hadn't simply discovered archaeological artifacts, they had apparently formed some kind of alliance with the beings who created them. The expedition's scientific teams made discoveries that challenged fundamental assumptions about Antarctica's history. Ice core samples revealed evidence of human activity dating back thousands of years, far predating any known Antarctic exploration. These weren't traces of primitive cultures, but indicators of advanced metallurgy and construction techniques that shouldn't have existed in the ancient world. Archaeological evidence suggested that Antarctica had supported not just life, but complex civilization during periods when the continent should have been completely covered by ice. Artifacts recovered from beneath the glacial layers showed technological sophistication that rivaled modern achievements. Some items defied analysis entirely, constructed from materials that couldn't be identified or replicated with existing scientific knowledge. The expedition's duration, originally planned for 6 to 8 months, was abruptly shortened after only 10 weeks. The official explanation cited harsh weather conditions and equipment failures, but expedition members later revealed a different story. They described encounters that had left the military leadership deeply shaken and convinced that they were facing capabilities far beyond anything in the American arsenal. The hastily organized withdrawal from Antarctica came after what witnesses described as a series of confrontations that demonstrated the futility of conventional military approaches. Aircraft were disabled by unknown means, electronic equipment failed without explanation, and personnel reported psychological effects that suggested some form of advanced mind manipulation technology. Admiral Byrd's public statements upon returning to the United States were carefully scripted, focusing on scientific achievements and territorial mapping. But his private communications painted a picture of a man profoundly disturbed by what he had witnessed. He spoke of encountering evidence of civilization that predated recorded history and technology that made human achievements seem primitive by comparison. The most chilling aspect of Byrd's private accounts was his conviction that the expedition had been allowed to return only as a warning. The advanced beings beneath Antarctica had demonstrated their technological superiority, not to destroy the American forces, but to send a message about the consequences of further interference. They had made it clear that while they preferred to remain hidden, they possessed the capability to intervene in human affairs if necessary. The classification of Operation Highjump's true findings marked the beginning of a systematic cover-up that would last for decades, expedition members were sworn to secrecy under the most severe national security restrictions. Documents were sealed, testimonies were buried, and anyone who attempted to reveal the truth found their careers destroyed. But the knowledge gained during those 10 weeks in Antarctica had profound effects on American military and scientific planning. Research programs were quietly initiated to understand and potentially replicate the technologies that had been encountered. The expedition had revealed that humanity wasn't alone on Earth, and that other civilizations possessed capabilities that could render conventional military power obsolete. The truth about Operation Highjump represented more than just another classified military operation. It marked humanity's first official encounter with intelligence that had been sharing the planet for millennia. The implications were so staggering that they couldn't be revealed without fundamentally altering humanity's understanding of its place in the world. What made the situation even more complex was the apparent connection between these ancient civilizations and the German Reich. The technology that had so easily overwhelmed American forces seemed to represent a collaboration that had survived the war's end. Somewhere beneath Antarctica's ice, advanced beings continued to work with human allies who had embraced ideologies that the civilized world had fought to defeat. The seeds of a cover-up that would span generations had been planted in the frozen wastes of Antarctica, where the most powerful military in human history had encountered forces that made their strength irrelevant. The launch of Landsat-1 in 1972 promised to revolutionize how humanity viewed its own planet. For the first time, satellites equipped with advanced imaging technology would systematically photograph Earth's surface, creating detailed maps of areas that had never been properly surveyed. Scientists anticipated discoveries in geology, climate science, and resource management. What they didn't expect was to find evidence that would challenge everything they thought they knew about Antarctica. Dr. Sarah Chen was among the first researchers to examine the high-resolution images streaming back from the polar orbits. Working late in her laboratory at the Goddard Space Flight Center, she was analyzing thermal infrared data when something caught her attention that made her question her own instruments. The heat signatures emerging from beneath Antarctica's ice sheet formed patterns too regular, too organized to be natural phenomena. The official explanation for these thermal anomalies focused on geothermal activity. Antarctica sits atop significant volcanic systems that occasionally warm the ice from below, creating the pockets of heat that satellites detected. But Chen's careful analysis revealed something that the standard interpretation couldn't explain. The heat sources were arranged in geometric configurations that resembled architectural layouts rather than random geological formations. Working with a small team of trusted colleagues, Chen began mapping the thermal anomalies across the continent. What emerged from their painstaking analysis was a network of interconnected heat sources that suggested a vast underground infrastructure. The patterns weren't random but appeared to follow planned layouts, with major concentrations connected by what could only be described as thermal corridors running beneath the ice. The most striking discoveries came from the coastal regions where German expeditions had operated decades earlier. Satellite thermal imaging revealed massive underground complexes beneath areas that appeared completely barren on the surface. These weren't small installations, but sprawling systems that extended for miles beneath the ice, maintaining temperatures well above freezing despite the hostile surface conditions. But thermal imaging was only the beginning. As satellite technology advanced through the 1970s and 80s, new capabilities revealed even more disturbing evidence. Synthetic aperture radar, capable of penetrating ice and snow, began detecting geometric structures buried beneath Antarctica's glacial cover. These weren't natural rock formations, but artificial constructions with straight lines, right angles, and symmetrical proportions that clearly indicated intelligent design. The structures detected by ground-penetrating radar defied conventional understanding of what was possible in Antarctica's environment. Some appeared to be towers or spires extending hundreds of feet above the buried landscape, while others resembled vast domed structures that could house entire cities. The engineering required to construct such facilities in Antarctica's harsh conditions would challenge even modern technological capabilities. Dr. Michael Harrison, a radar specialist working with classified military satellites, discovered what he believed to be the most significant evidence yet. His analysis of high-resolution radar data revealed what appeared to be a massive pyramid structure buried beneath 2 miles of ice in the Ellsworth Mountains. The object measured over 3,000 feet at its base and rose to a height of nearly 1,500 feet, making it larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The pyramid's proportions and orientation weren't random. Harrison's measurements revealed that it was positioned according to precise astronomical alignments that suggested advanced knowledge of celestial mechanics. The structure was oriented toward magnetic north with an accuracy that would be difficult to achieve even with modern surveying equipment. This precision suggested that its builders possessed a sophisticated understanding of both engineering and astronomy. Even more intriguing were the smaller structures that radar imaging revealed clustered around the massive pyramid. These appeared to be arranged in patterns that resembled urban planning, with what looked like roads, plazas, and building complexes laid out in geometric configurations. The entire site suggested a planned city of enormous scope, preserved beneath the ice like a frozen moment in time. Military satellites equipped with the most advanced imaging technology available began conducting systematic surveys of Antarctica in the 1980s. The classified results of these missions revealed additional structures that dwarfed even the pyramid discovery. Deep beneath the ice, satellites detected what appeared to be a network of tunnels and chambers extending across hundreds of miles of Antarctic territory. The tunnel systems weren't crude excavations, but engineered spaces with smooth walls and regular dimensions that suggested advanced construction techniques. Some appeared to connect distant surface anomalies, creating what amounted to a subterranean transportation network spanning much of the continent. The scale of this underground infrastructure implied construction efforts that would dwarf any engineering project in recorded history. Satellite magnetometry revealed additional mysteries hidden beneath the ice. Magnetic field measurements detected massive metallic objects buried at various depths throughout Antarctica. These weren't natural iron deposits, but appeared to be artificial structures with magnetic signatures unlike anything found elsewhere on Earth. Some of these objects registered magnetic fields so strong that they interfered with compass readings from aircraft flying overhead. The most perplexing magnetic anomalies were found in areas where no surface features suggested their presence. Deep beneath seemingly empty ice fields, satellites detected what appeared to be vast metallic structures with complex internal geometries. The magnetic patterns suggested objects with moving parts or internal mechanisms that continued to function despite being buried under miles of ice. High-resolution optical satellites revealed surface features that raised questions about Antarctica's recent history. In areas where ice had temporarily melted or shifted, imagery captured what appeared to be artificial structures partially exposed to the surface. These weren't ancient ruins, weathered by millennia of exposure, but relatively modern constructions that seemed to have been recently revealed by changing ice conditions. The structures visible in these brief exposures showed architectural features that didn't match any known style of construction. They appeared to be built from materials that showed no signs of weathering or age, maintaining sharp edges and smooth surfaces despite their exposure to Antarctica's harsh environment. This suggested either extremely advanced construction materials or structures that were far newer than their buried locations would indicate. Infrared satellite data revealed another layer of mystery. Certain areas of Antarctica showed heat signatures that fluctuated in regular patterns, suggesting active systems or machinery operating beneath the ice. These weren't the steady warmth of geothermal features, but variable thermal outputs that implied controlled processes or technology in operation. The thermal patterns sometimes correlated with magnetic anomalies, suggesting that the buried objects were not only metallic, but actively powered. The energy sources required to maintain such systems beneath miles of ice would need to be both extremely powerful and remarkably durable. No known human technology could operate reliably under such conditions for extended periods. Satellite communications specialists reported another category of anomalies that added to the mystery. Electronic signals of unknown origin were occasionally detected, emanating from various locations beneath Antarctica's ice. These weren't natural electromagnetic phenomena, but appeared to be artificial transmissions using frequencies and encoding methods that didn't match any known communication systems. The signals were brief and infrequent, making them difficult to study or decode. But their technical characteristics suggested sophisticated communication technology, operating according to protocols that human science hadn't developed. Some specialists theorized that they might represent communication between different underground installations or contact with systems located elsewhere. Google Earth's launch in 2005 brought satellite imagery to the general public for the first time, but Antarctica remained heavily censored. Large areas were blurred or showed obviously outdated imagery, while other regions displayed clear signs of digital manipulation. The very fact that such extensive censorship was applied to satellite imagery of a supposedly empty continent raised questions about what was being hidden. Independent researchers began analyzing the limited satellite data available through public channels, comparing different time periods and image sources to identify inconsistencies. Their work revealed evidence of ongoing construction or modification activities in areas that were supposed to be pristine wilderness. Time-lapse analysis showed changes in surface features that couldn't be explained by natural processes alone. The most startling discovery came from researchers who gained access to classified satellite data through Freedom of Information requests. The documents they obtained, heavily redacted but still revealing, showed that government agencies had been systematically monitoring Antarctica's anomalous features for decades. The scope of this surveillance suggested that the satellite discoveries weren't surprising to authorities, but were confirming knowledge they already possessed. What became clear from the accumulated satellite evidence was that Antarctica harbored secrets that went far beyond ancient maps or historical expeditions. The continent contained active installations, advanced technology, and ongoing activities that were being carefully concealed from public knowledge. The eyes in the sky had revealed that humanity wasn't alone on its own planet, and that other intelligences had been operating in Earth's most remote regions far longer than official history acknowledged. The satellite data painted a picture of Antarctica as a center of activity rather than a barren wasteland, a place where advanced civilizations continued to operate beneath a carefully maintained facade of emptiness. The implications were staggering. If such extensive infrastructure existed beneath the ice, what else might be hidden in the world's other remote regions? The clay tablets discovered in the ruins of Babylon contained more than records of trade and conquest. Deep within the cuneiform inscriptions, scholars found references to lands that shouldn't have existed in ancient memory. descriptions of a great southern continent inhabited by beings of extraordinary knowledge and power. For centuries, these passages were dismissed as mythology or poetic exaggeration, but the accumulating evidence from modern Antarctic exploration began to cast these ancient texts in an entirely different light. Professor Elena Vasquez had spent her career translating Mesopotamian texts when she stumbled upon a series of tablets that changed her understanding of ancient knowledge. Working in the basement archives of the British Museum, she was examining a collection of Sumerian administrative records when she encountered something that made her question everything she thought she knew about the ancient world's geographical awareness. The text spoke of the land of the white darkness, a realm at the world's end where the sun disappeared for months at a time and the ground was covered in eternal ice. But these weren't vague mythological references. The descriptions contained specific details about seasonal patterns, astronomical observations, and geographical features that matched modern knowledge of Antarctica with startling precision. According to the ancient account, this southern realm was inhabited by the Watchers of the Sky, beings who possessed knowledge of the heavens that surpassed even the astronomical achievements of Babylon's priest scientists. These entities allegedly maintained vast libraries beneath the ice, preserving knowledge from before the Great Flood that had reshaped the world. The text claimed that selected human emissaries had been permitted to visit these repositories and return with advanced learning. The Sumerian records weren't isolated examples. As Vasquez expanded her research, she discovered similar references scattered throughout the ancient world's literary traditions. Egyptian hieroglyphic texts mentioned a southern land of the gods, where divine beings maintained eternal watch over human civilization. Sanskrit epics described journeys to polar regions where advanced beings dwelt in cities of crystal and metal. The Vedic traditions of ancient India contained perhaps the most detailed accounts. The Ramayana spoke of Vimanas, flying vehicles that could traverse the world in hours, carrying passengers to distant lands, including polar regions where great temples had been built by beings of godlike knowledge. The descriptions of these southern territories included references to warm valleys sheltered from ice, underground cities powered by eternal flames, and libraries containing the history of multiple world ages. Buddhist texts added another layer to these ancient testimonies. The Kalachakra Tantra described a hidden kingdom called Shambhala, often associated with northern regions but containing geographical clues that pointed toward Antarctic locations. This realm was said to be ruled by enlightened beings who possessed technology that seemed magical to ordinary humans, craft that could fly without wings, weapons that struck without physical projectiles, and communication systems that operated across vast distances instantaneously. The most intriguing aspect of these diverse traditions was their consistency. Despite originating from cultures separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time, they described remarkably similar features: polar regions inhabited by advanced beings, underground cities maintained at comfortable temperatures, and technologies that exceeded normal human capabilities. The parallels were too specific and numerous to be coincidental. Ancient Greek sources contributed additional pieces to this puzzle. Plato's descriptions of Atlantis included references to that civilization's far-flung colonies, some of which were said to exist in the world's most remote reaches. While most scholars focused on the Atlantic location suggested by the name, careful reading of the text revealed mentions of settlements beyond the pillars of ice, where the sun's path reached its southernmost extreme. Aristotle's lost works, preserved in fragmentary quotes by later authors, apparently contain detailed discussions of polar regions and their inhabitants. These references suggested that Greek scholars possessed geographical knowledge that extended far beyond the Mediterranean world they're commonly thought to have known. The fragments spoke of southern lands, where the stars wheel differently and beings of great learning maintain the world's oldest libraries. Roman historians added their own testimony to this ancient chorus. Tacitus wrote of expeditions that had reached the world's frozen edge and encountered civilizations that possessed knowledge predating Rome's founding by millennia. These accounts were typically dismissed as propaganda or exaggeration meant to glorify Roman exploration, but their specific details about polar astronomy and geography suggested genuine contact with knowledgeable sources. The ancient Chinese contributed perhaps the most systematic accounts. The Shan Haijing, or Classic of Mountains and Seas, contained detailed geographical descriptions that included polar regions inhabited by beings of extraordinary longevity and wisdom. These texts describe the southern icelands as containing palaces of eternal winter, where sky watchers maintained instruments for observing celestial movements across multiple ages of the world. Chinese astronomical records contained references to southern lights that corresponded to the modern understanding of aurora australis, phenomena that shouldn't have been visible from Chinese latitudes. The text suggested that Chinese astronomers had received reports from observers stationed in polar regions, implying contact networks that spanned the globe thousands of years before such connections were thought possible. Mayan codices, despite originating in Central America, contained surprising references to polar phenomena and ice-bound lands. The Dresden Codex included astronomical calculations that seemed to account for observations made from extreme southern latitudes, suggesting that Mayan astronomers had access to data from polar regions. The text spoke of the cold place where time moves differently, and the ice keepers who remember all the turnings of the world. Even more intriguing were the Mayan references to skyboats that could carry observers to any part of the world within a single day and night. These vehicles were described as being controlled by beings who weren't fully human, but who shared knowledge with selected human cultures. The descriptions of these craft included details about their construction and operation that paralleled modern UFO reports with unsettling accuracy. Pacific Island traditions added another dimension to the ancient testimonies. Polynesian navigation legends spoke of voyages to the white land beyond the world's edge, where their ancestors had learned the secrets of long-distance ocean travel. These accounts described encounters with beings who possessed detailed knowledge of ocean currents, wind patterns, and stellar navigation techniques that enabled the Polynesian expansion across the Pacific. The Polynesian accounts were particularly significant because they came from cultures that demonstrated extraordinary navigational abilities, successfully colonizing islands across thousands of miles of open ocean using techniques that modern science is only beginning to understand. If these accomplished navigators claim to have learned their skills from beings inhabiting polar regions, their testimony carried considerable weight. Aboriginal Australian traditions contain the oldest references to these polar connections. Dreamtime stories spoke of journeys to the cold country where the rainbow serpent maintained one of its most important dwelling places. These accounts described underground caverns filled with crystal formations that generated their own light and warmth, creating habitable spaces within the icebound lands. The Aboriginal accounts were particularly detailed about the beings encountered in these polar regions. They were described as tall, pale entities with elongated features and eyes adapted to low-light conditions. These beings allegedly possessed knowledge of metallurgy, astronomy, and medicine that they shared selectively with human visitors who demonstrated wisdom and peaceful intentions. Native American traditions from both North and South America contained similar themes. Inuit legends spoke of the people below the ice, who maintained great cities beneath the polar cap and occasionally emerged to share knowledge with human tribes. These beings were said to possess tools and weapons made from materials that never dulled or broke, and vehicles that could traverse ice, water, and air with equal ease. South American indigenous traditions included accounts of polar expeditions undertaken by shamans and tribal leaders who returned with advanced knowledge of healing, astronomy, and metallurgy. The Inca records spoke of messengers who could reach the Ice Kingdom in journeys that would be impossible using conventional transportation, suggesting the use of advanced technology for these polar contacts. What made these diverse traditions particularly compelling was their shared emphasis on knowledge preservation. Across cultures and continents, the ancient accounts consistently described the polar regions as repositories of wisdom that predated known human civilization. These weren't simple myths about distant lands, but detailed testimonies about ongoing contact with advanced beings who maintained libraries and archives in the world's most remote locations. The ancient texts also shared another disturbing theme: warnings about the consequences of misusing the knowledge obtained from these polar sources. Multiple traditions spoke of civilizations that had been destroyed after attempting to weaponize technologies received from the ice dwellers. These accounts suggested that the polar beings maintained strict oversight of how their knowledge was applied and were prepared to intervene forcefully when their gifts were perverted to destructive purposes. Modern scholars typically dismiss these ancient accounts as mythology, but the accumulating evidence from satellite imagery, archaeological discoveries, and historical expeditions suggested that the ancient witnesses might have been recording actual experiences rather than creating fantasy. The consistency of their testimony across cultures and time periods pointed towards shared encounters with genuine phenomena rather than coincidental myth-making. The implications were staggering. If the ancient texts were reliable records, then human civilization had been in contact with advanced beings inhabiting polar regions for thousands of years. This contact hadn't been accidental, but was part of a systematic program of knowledge transfer that had shaped human development across multiple cultures. The technological achievements of ancient civilizations might not have been independent human innovations, but the result of guidance from beings whose own origins stretched back to the dawn of human history. The ancient witnesses had left a clear message: humanity was not alone on Earth, and the polar regions contained secrets that could transform human understanding of both the past and the future. December 1st, 1959 marked one of the most remarkable diplomatic achievements in human history, and perhaps the most successful cover-up ever orchestrated. On that date, 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty, ostensibly to preserve the continent for peaceful scientific research and prevent military activities in the region. The public celebrated this unprecedented example of international cooperation, but the treaty's true purpose was far more complex than anyone imagined. Ambassador James McKinley arrived at the Washington conference with briefing materials that would have shocked the American public. Deep within his classified portfolio lay reports from Operation Highjump, German expedition analyses, and satellite intelligence that painted a picture of Antarctica unlike anything the world's citizens had been told. The continent wasn't an empty wasteland awaiting scientific exploration. It was already occupied by intelligences that possessed capabilities far exceeding human technology. The negotiations that led to the Antarctic Treaty weren't driven by environmental concerns or scientific cooperation. They were emergency diplomatic sessions designed to address a crisis that threatened the stability of human civilization. The participating nations had independently discovered evidence of advanced non-human presence in Antarctica, and they were scrambling to create a framework for managing this unprecedented situation without triggering global panic. Behind closed doors, diplomats shared intelligence that read like science fiction. Soviet representatives described encounters between their military forces and unidentified aircraft that displayed impossible flight characteristics. British intelligence presented an analysis of German documents that revealed collaboration between Nazi forces and entities of unknown origin. American delegates shared reconnaissance data showing vast underground installations that couldn't have been built with any known human technology. The treaty's seemingly innocent provisions took on sinister meaning when viewed in this context. The prohibition against military activities wasn't about preventing conflict between human nations. It was recognition that conventional military forces were utterly inadequate against the technologies that had been encountered in Antarctica. The restriction on nuclear testing wasn't environmental protection, but acknowledgement that such weapons might provoke retaliation from beings whose defensive capabilities could devastate human civilization. Article 4 of the treaty contained particularly significant language that has been consistently misinterpreted by the public. The provision that no acts or activities taking place while the present treaty is in force shall constitute a basis for asserting, supporting, or denying a claim to territorial sovereignty in Antarctica wasn't about resolving disputes between signatory nations. It was recognition that human governments had no legitimate sovereignty over territories already occupied by non-human intelligences. The inspection provisions of the treaty served a dual purpose that wasn't apparent to outside observers. While officially designed to ensure compliance with peaceful research requirements, these mechanisms actually functioned as an early warning system to monitor both human activities and non-human responses. The regular inspections weren't checking for military installations, but were maintaining surveillance on contact zones where human and non-human interests intersected. The treaty's expansion over the decades revealed the true scope of the situation. As more nations gained knowledge of Antarctica's real status, they were quietly brought into the agreement. The gradual increase in signatory countries wasn't driven by growing environmental consciousness, but by the need to include every nation that discovered evidence of the continent's true nature. By 2024, 54 nations had signed the treaty, creating a global conspiracy of silence that spanned ideological and political divisions. The most telling aspect of the treaty system was what it didn't address. Despite covering an entire continent larger than the United States and Mexico combined, the agreement contained no provisions for economic development, resource extraction, or permanent human settlement. This wasn't environmental protection, but implicit recognition that such activities were impossible in territories controlled by others who possessed overwhelming technological superiority. The enforcement mechanisms of the Antarctic Treaty operated through channels that never appeared in public discussions. When nations or organizations attempted to conduct unauthorized activities in Antarctica, they faced consequences that went far beyond diplomatic pressure. Research programs lost funding through untraceable bureaucratic procedures. Expeditions encountered equipment failures that couldn't be explained by environmental factors. Personnel experienced psychological effects that discouraged further involvement in Antarctic activities. The scientific research permitted under the treaty followed strict limitations that weren't apparent in the public documentation. Research stations were located in designated areas that avoided the most sensitive zones where non-human activities were concentrated. scientific programs were subject to approval processes that seemed bureaucratic, but actually functioned to screen out investigations that might reveal prohibited knowledge. The research conducted was real but carefully constrained to maintain the illusion of human scientific exploration while avoiding discoveries that could expose the truth. The most sophisticated aspect of the cover-up was how it transformed the reality of occupied territory into the fiction of pristine wilderness. Public education systems, media coverage, and scientific literature consistently portrayed Antarctica as an uninhabited continent where human researchers were conducting the first systematic exploration. This narrative was so successful that even most scientists working in Antarctica believed they were studying a genuinely empty landscape. The treaty nations coordinated their information control with remarkable efficiency. Documentary footage of Antarctica was carefully edited to remove any evidence of non-human presence. Satellite imagery released to the public was processed to eliminate anomalous features. Scientific papers were subject to a security review that eliminated references to discoveries that contradicted the official narrative. The result was a complete alternative reality that replaced actual Antarctic conditions with fictional descriptions of barren ice sheets and primitive wildlife. The financial mechanisms supporting the treaty system revealed the enormous resources devoted to maintaining the deception. The Antarctic research programs of major nations consumed budgets that far exceeded what legitimate scientific exploration would require. These funds weren't supporting research, but were financing an extensive surveillance and containment operation designed to monitor non-human activities while preventing unauthorized human contact. Intelligence agencies played crucial roles in treaty enforcement that went far beyond their normal responsibilities. Personnel from the CIA, KGB, MI6, and other services were regularly stationed in Antarctica under scientific or support staff cover. Their actual mission was maintaining security protocols that prevented treaty violations while gathering intelligence on non-human activities for their respective governments. The most disturbing aspect of the Global Silence Pact was how it had corrupted the normal processes of scientific inquiry and democratic governance. Researchers who discovered evidence contradicting the official narrative found their careers destroyed through systematic discrediting. Government officials who attempted to reveal the truth faced consequences that extended far beyond normal political retaliation. The treaty had created a shadow system of governance that operated outside normal legal and ethical constraints. The psychological operations supporting the cover-up extended into popular culture and media. Films, television shows, and books about Antarctica consistently reinforced the image of an empty continent, while ridiculing suggestions that it might harbor advanced civilizations. This wasn't accidental, but represented coordinated efforts to shape public perception and discredit potential whistleblowers before they could gain credibility. The treaty system had also established protocols for managing contact events that couldn't be completely suppressed. When evidence of non-human presence occasionally surfaced in public, carefully orchestrated debunking campaigns would discredit the sources while offering alternative explanations that maintained the official narrative. These operations were so sophisticated that they often convinced even the original witnesses that they had misinterpreted what they experienced. The most chilling element of the Global Silence Pact was its effectiveness across multiple generations. Children born after 1959 grew up in a world where the Antarctic Treaty was simply accepted as an environmental protection measure. Educational systems reinforced this interpretation while carefully avoiding any curriculum that might lead students to question why such extensive international cooperation was necessary for a supposedly empty continent. The treaty's success in maintaining global silence had profound implications beyond Antarctica itself. It demonstrated that modern democratic societies could be systematically deceived about fundamental realities through coordinated information control. If such an extensive cover-up could be maintained for decades regarding an entire continent, what other deceptions might be operating in areas of lesser scope and visibility? The Global Silence Pact had transformed one of humanity's most significant discoveries, contact with advanced non-human intelligence, into humanity's most successful lie. The treaty nations had chosen deception over disclosure, maintaining stability at the cost of truth. But the very success of their deception was beginning to create new problems, as advancing technology made it increasingly difficult to suppress evidence of what really lay beneath Antarctica's ice. The carefully maintained fiction was beginning to crack, and the consequences of revealing 65 years of systematic deception might prove more destabilizing than the truth the treaty had been designed to hide. The phone call came at 3 a.m, the voice on the other end shaking with a mixture of fear and desperation. Colonel Robert Hansen had been retired from the Air Force for 15 years, living quietly in a small Montana town, when something compelled him to break the silence he had maintained since his service in Antarctica during the 1970s. What he told investigative journalist Patricia Moore that night would fundamentally change her understanding of what lay hidden beneath the world's most remote continent. Hansen's voice carried the weight of decades of suppressed memories as he described his assignment to what was officially called the Antarctic Support Command. His unit's mission was supposedly logistical, maintaining supply lines and communication systems for the various research stations scattered across the continent. But within weeks of arrival, Hansen discovered that their real purpose was far more complex and infinitely more disturbing than anything in their official briefing materials. The colonel described his first encounter with what personnel privately called the anomalies during a routine supply run to a remote research facility. His transport helicopter had developed mechanical problems and was forced to make an emergency landing in an area that wasn't supposed to contain any human installations. As the crew worked to repair the aircraft, Hansen noticed structures protruding from the ice that clearly weren't natural formations. According to his account, these weren't crude shelters or temporary installations, but sophisticated constructions that appeared to have been built for permanence. The materials didn't match anything in the military's inventory: smooth, metallic surfaces that showed no signs of corrosion despite exposure to Antarctica's harsh environment. Most disturbing was the evidence of recent activity around these structures, including tracks and equipment that suggested ongoing operations. Hansen's testimony was just the beginning. As word spread through unofficial networks that someone was finally willing to listen, other veterans began coming forward with their own accounts of encounters that defied official explanations. Each story added new pieces to a puzzle that painted a picture of Antarctica as a center of activity rather than the empty wilderness portrayed in public accounts. Master Sergeant Linda Torres had served with the Navy's Antarctic Development Squadron during the 1980s. Her official duties involved maintaining aircraft and supporting flight operations for research missions. But Torres described assignments that took her team into areas where they encountered technology that shouldn't have existed anywhere on Earth, let alone in Antarctica's supposedly primitive conditions. Torres spoke of aircraft hangars built into mountainsides that contained vehicles unlike anything in conventional military arsenals. These crafts weren't experimental human technology, but appeared to operate according to principles that defied known physics. She described watching these vehicles perform impossible maneuvers, accelerating instantly to tremendous speeds, changing direction without apparent momentum effects, and operating silently despite their obvious power. The most disturbing aspect of Torres's account was her description of the personnel operating this advanced technology. They weren't entirely human, she claimed, but possessed physical characteristics that suggested either genetic modification or non-human origin. These beings were tall, pale, and possessed features that were subtly but unmistakably different from normal human proportions. They moved with fluid grace that seemed almost mechanical in its precision. Dr. James Mitchell had served as a geologist with the United States Antarctic Program for over a decade, participating in research projects that officially focused on ice core analysis and climate studies. But Mitchell revealed that his real work involved cataloging and analyzing artifacts recovered from beneath the ice, objects that challenged every assumption about Antarctica's history and the development of human civilization. Mitchell described underground excavation sites where teams of specialists worked around the clock to recover materials from what appeared to be ancient cities preserved in the ice. These weren't primitive settlements, but sophisticated urban centers with architecture that surpassed modern engineering capabilities. The buildings were constructed from materials that couldn't be identified or replicated using current technology. The artifacts recovered from these sites defied conventional archaeological categorization. Mitchell spoke of finding tools and devices that appeared to be technological in nature, but operated according to principles that human science couldn't explain. Some objects seemed to be powered by unknown energy sources that continued to function despite being buried in ice for unknown periods of time. Captain David Walsh had commanded security details at various Antarctic installations during the 1990s. His official mission was protecting research personnel and equipment from environmental hazards. But Walsh revealed that his real responsibility was maintaining security protocols around contact events with non-human intelligences that regularly visited Antarctic facilities. Walsh described encounters with beings who possessed technology that made human military equipment seem primitive by comparison. These entities could appear and disappear at will, pass through solid barriers without apparent difficulty, and communicate telepathically with human personnel. They seemed to be monitoring human activities in Antarctica while conducting their own operations according to agendas that remained mysterious. The security protocols surrounding these contact events were more sophisticated than anything Walsh had encountered in conventional military service. Personnel were subjected to psychological conditioning designed to suppress memories of sensitive encounters. Those who proved unable to maintain required security levels were transferred away from Antarctic assignments and subjected to monitoring that continued long after their service ended. Electronics technician First Class Maria Santos had maintained communication systems for Antarctic research stations during the early 2000s. Her work required her to monitor radio frequencies and satellite communications across the continent, giving her unique insight into activities that weren't reflected in official reports. Santos described detecting communication signals that didn't originate from known human sources. These transmissions used frequencies and encoding methods that weren't part of any terrestrial communication system. The signals seemed to coordinate activities between different locations across Antarctica, suggesting a communication network that operated independently of human control. Even more disturbing were the occasions when human communication systems were interfered with or taken over by unknown sources. Santos reported incidents where radio and satellite equipment would begin transmitting information that no human operator had initiated. These unauthorized transmissions contained technical data and coordinates that seemed to direct human activities towards specific locations or objectives. The pattern that emerged from these testimonies was clear: Antarctica was the site of ongoing operations involving both human personnel and non-human intelligences working according to agreements that weren't acknowledged in any public forum. The research stations and scientific programs that the public knew about were real, but they functioned as cover operations for activities that involved technologies and entities far beyond normal human experience. The psychological toll on personnel involved in these operations was severe. Many witnesses described developing anxiety disorders, sleep disturbances, and memory problems that began during their Antarctic assignments and persisted long after their return to conventional life. Some reported being subjected to debriefing procedures that seemed designed to suppress rather than document their experiences. The most disturbing testimonies came from medical personnel who had treated individuals injured during contact events with non-human entities. Dr. Sarah Kim, a military physician who had served at Antarctic medical facilities, described treating wounds that couldn't have been caused by conventional weapons or environmental hazards. The injuries showed characteristics that suggested exposure to energy sources or technologies that human medicine couldn't identify or effectively treat. Kim also spoke of conducting medical examinations on individuals who weren't entirely human. These subjects possessed physiological characteristics that deviated from normal human parameters in ways that suggested either advanced genetic modification or non-human origin. The medical data from these examinations was immediately classified at the highest security levels and removed from normal medical records. The coordination required to maintain silence among so many witnesses revealed the sophisticated nature of the cover-up operation. Personnel were bound by security oaths that extended far beyond normal military confidentiality requirements. Those who violated these agreements faced consequences that went beyond legal penalties. Many reported systematic harassment, employment difficulties, and social isolation that continued for years after their Antarctic service ended. Yet despite the pressure to remain silent, the testimonies continued to emerge. The witnesses weren't seeking attention or financial gain. Most risked significant personal consequences by speaking out. Their motivations seemed to be a growing conviction that the public deserved to know the truth about what was happening in Antarctica, regardless of the political or social implications. The consistency of the accounts across different time periods, locations, and types of personnel suggested that the witnesses were describing real events rather than shared delusions or fabricated stories. The technical details in their testimonies demonstrated knowledge that couldn't have been obtained through normal channels, while the emotional authenticity of their accounts carried the weight of genuine traumatic experience. What made the testimonies even more credible was what they didn't claim. The witnesses weren't describing encounters with obviously fictional scenarios, but were reporting experiences that, while extraordinary, remained within the bounds of physical possibility. Their accounts suggested the presence of advanced but comprehensible technology operated by beings who, while non-human, weren't supernatural or magical. The voices from the ice painted a picture of Antarctica as humanity's first contact zone with intelligences that possessed capabilities far exceeding current human achievements. The continent wasn't an empty wilderness awaiting exploration, but was already occupied by entities who had been monitoring and occasionally interacting with human civilization for decades or possibly centuries. The implications of these testimonies extended far beyond Antarctica itself. If such extensive contact with non-human intelligence had been occurring under official secrecy for so long, what other aspects of modern reality might be fundamentally different from public understanding? The witnesses had opened a window into a world where the boundaries between human and non-human, terrestrial and extraterrestrial, had already been crossed in ways that challenged every assumption about humanity's place in the universe. The ice core sample that arrived at Dr. Rachel Morrison's laboratory looked unremarkable, just another cylindrical section of frozen Antarctic ice destined for routine climate analysis. But when Morrison began her examination using standard microscopy techniques, she discovered something embedded in the ice that would haunt her for the rest of her career: perfectly preserved organic material that shouldn't have existed according to everything science understood about Antarctica's history. The sample had been extracted from a depth of nearly 3 miles beneath the surface, placing its formation in a time period when Antarctica should have been completely frozen and lifeless for millions of years. Yet under Morrison's microscope, the ice revealed cellular structures that were not only organic, but showed signs of advanced organization that exceeded anything found in known natural systems. The implications were staggering. Either the dating methods were fundamentally flawed, or life forms of extraordinary sophistication had existed in Antarctica far longer than conventional science allowed. Morrison's discovery was part of a growing body of archaeological evidence that painted a radically different picture of Antarctica's past. Across the continent, research teams were uncovering artifacts and remains that challenged fundamental assumptions about the development of life on Earth and the history of human civilization. But this evidence wasn't being celebrated as revolutionary scientific breakthroughs. It was being systematically suppressed and removed from public knowledge. The official explanation for the organic material in Morrison's ice cores focused on contamination and misidentification. Peer reviewers suggested that modern bacteria had somehow infiltrated the samples during extraction or processing. But Morrison's careful analysis ruled out contamination. The organic structures were integrated into the ice formation itself, proving they had been frozen in place for geological time periods. Even more disturbing were the characteristics of the organic material itself. The cellular structures showed evidence of genetic organization that was far more complex than anything found in Earth's current biosphere. Some cells contained what appeared to be artificial modifications, genetic engineering that suggested technological intervention in biological development. The sophistication of these modifications exceeded current human capabilities by orders of magnitude. Dr. Anthony Reeves had spent his career studying Antarctic geology when he made a discovery that forced him to question everything he thought he knew about the continent's formation. While analyzing rock samples from the Transantarctic mountains, Reeves identified mineral compositions that shouldn't have existed in Antarctica's geological environment. The rocks contained elements and crystalline structures that suggested exposure to technologies that could manipulate matter at the atomic level. The mineral anomalies weren't random, but appeared in specific geological layers that corresponded to particular time periods in Earth's history. This suggested that technological civilizations had been active in Antarctica during multiple epochs, leaving behind evidence of their capabilities embedded in the geological record itself. The precision of these mineral modifications indicated an understanding of physics and chemistry that human science was only beginning to approach. Reeves attempted to publish his findings through standard academic channels, but his papers were consistently rejected by peer review processes that seemed designed to suppress rather than evaluate his research. When he persisted in presenting his evidence at scientific conferences, he found his funding eliminated and his access to Antarctic samples restricted through administrative procedures that effectively ended his research career. The pattern of suppression extended across multiple disciplines and institutions. Archaeologists who discovered artificial structures beneath the ice found their excavation permits revoked. Biologists who identified anomalous life forms had their samples confiscated by authorities, claiming security concerns. Geologists who documented impossible mineral formations were transferred to projects that kept them away from Antarctic materials. Dr. Susan Walsh had been examining Antarctic fossils for over 20 years when she made a discovery that changed her understanding of life's development on Earth. Deep within rock formations that predated known complex life by hundreds of millions of years, Walsh found fossils of organisms that displayed characteristics suggesting technological augmentation. These weren't natural evolutionary adaptations, but appeared to be biological systems that had been deliberately modified. The fossilized organisms showed evidence of integrated structures that resembled mechanical components, materials with properties that exceeded anything found in natural biological systems. Some fossils contained what appeared to be data storage systems, organic computers that could process and retain information across geological timescales. The sophistication of these biological technologies suggested civilizations that had achieved integration between organic and mechanical systems that current science could barely imagine. Walsh's attempts to document and study these remarkable fossils were systematically obstructed by institutional barriers that prevented her from conducting a thorough analysis. Her samples were repeatedly lost during laboratory procedures, her research grants were cancelled without explanation, and her academic colleagues were discouraged from collaborating with her work through subtle but effective pressure. The most significant archaeological discoveries came from excavation sites that weren't officially acknowledged to exist. Underground facilities carved into Antarctic bedrock contained evidence of civilizations that had achieved technological capabilities far beyond anything in recorded human history. These weren't primitive shelters, but sophisticated urban centers with infrastructure that suggested an understanding of engineering principles that current science was only beginning to explore. The architecture found at these sites defied conventional understanding of what was possible using available materials and energy sources. Buildings were constructed from substances that showed no signs of degradation despite their apparent age, suggesting materials science that had solved problems of durability and maintenance that continue to challenge modern engineering. The structural designs incorporated principles that maximized efficiency while maintaining aesthetic beauty that rivaled humanity's greatest architectural achievements. Even more remarkable were the technological systems discovered within these ancient facilities. Machinery that continued to function despite being abandoned for unknown periods demonstrated engineering reliability that exceeded anything in current human technology. Power systems operated according to principles that human science couldn't identify, drawing energy from sources that remained mysterious even after extensive analysis. The artifacts recovered from these sites included devices whose functions could only be guessed at using current human knowledge. Some appeared to be communication systems capable of transmitting information across vast distances using methods that didn't rely on electromagnetic radiation. Others seemed designed for manufacturing processes that could manipulate matter at the molecular level, creating materials with properties that defied known physical laws. Most disturbing were the information storage systems found throughout these ancient facilities. Unlike human data storage methods that degraded over time, these systems maintained perfect information integrity across geological time periods. The data they contained included star charts that showed stellar positions across multiple galactic rotations, suggesting civilizations that had maintained continuous observations for periods that dwarfed recorded human history. The biological remains found at these sites challenged fundamental assumptions about the development of intelligent life on Earth. The beings who had built these facilities weren't entirely human, but possessed characteristics that suggested either advanced genetic modification or non-terrestrial origin. Their physical remains showed adaptations for extended lifespans, enhanced cognitive capabilities, and resistance to environmental extremes that would be lethal to unmodified humans. The genetic analysis of these remains revealed information that was immediately classified at the highest security levels. The DNA samples contained sequences that didn't match any known terrestrial life forms, suggesting either artificial genetic engineering or evolutionary development that had occurred in isolation from Earth's normal biological processes. Some genetic markers appeared to be designed rather than evolved, indicating deliberate modification by intelligences with a comprehensive understanding of biological systems. The archaeological evidence painted a picture of Antarctica as a center of advanced civilization that had existed for far longer than mainstream archaeology acknowledged. These weren't primitive cultures struggling to survive in harsh conditions, but sophisticated societies that had achieved technological mastery over their environment. Their capabilities had enabled them to maintain comfortable living conditions in Antarctica, regardless of climate changes that would have made surface habitation impossible for conventional human societies. The suppression of this archaeological evidence represented more than academic censorship. It was a systematic elimination of information that could revolutionize human understanding of intelligence, technology, and the development of civilization itself. The discoveries suggested that Earth had been home to multiple advanced civilizations across geological time, and that current human society might represent a relatively recent and primitive development compared to what had existed before. The implications extended beyond archaeology into fundamental questions about the nature of intelligence and the development of technology. If such advanced civilizations had existed on Earth's past, their knowledge and capabilities might still be accessible through archaeological investigation. The suppression of this research prevented humanity from learning from civilizations that had solved problems of energy, materials, and social organization that continue to challenge contemporary society. The forbidden archaeology of Antarctica represented humanity's greatest lost opportunity, the chance to learn from civilizations that had achieved sustainable advanced technology while maintaining harmony with their environment. Instead of embracing this knowledge, institutional forces had chosen to suppress it, condemning humanity to repeat the mistakes of the past while remaining ignorant of solutions that had already been developed and tested across geological timescales. The evidence remained buried beneath Antarctic ice, waiting for the day when humanity would finally be ready to confront the truth about its place in the long history of intelligent life on Earth. But that day seemed increasingly distant as the machinery of suppression continued to operate, ensuring that the forbidden archaeology would remain hidden from the very species that could benefit most from its revelations. The email arrived in Dr. Patricia Chen's inbox at exactly 2:37 a.m., sent from an account that didn't exist according to any directory she could access. The message was brief, containing only coordinates, a time, and instructions to come alone. Chen had been investigating Antarctic anomalies for 3 years, watching her funding disappear and her colleagues distance themselves as her research approached dangerous territory. Now someone was finally willing to meet. The parking garage was empty except for a single figure waiting beside a nondescript sedan. The woman introduced herself only as Sarah, claiming to be a former intelligence analyst who had spent 15 years managing information related to Antarctic operations. What she revealed during their 2-hour conversation would expose the vast machinery that had kept humanity ignorant of its most significant discovery for over 7 decades. According to Sarah's account, the suppression of Antarctic truth wasn't the work of any single government or organization, but represented a coordinated effort involving intelligence agencies, academic institutions, media corporations, and financial networks spanning the globe. The scope of this operation dwarfed anything in recorded history. requiring resources and coordination that challenged conventional understanding of how modern societies functioned. The foundation of the suppression system was built on compartmentalization that ensured most participants never understood their role in maintaining the cover-up. Scientists working on Antarctic research received funding for legitimate projects while remaining unaware that their work was being filtered through security reviews that eliminated dangerous discoveries. Journalists covering polar stories were provided with approved sources and storylines that maintained official narratives while appearing to offer independent reporting. Sarah described how academic publishing had been systematically compromised to prevent the dissemination of threatening information. Peer review processes had been infiltrated by reviewers who were actually intelligence operatives trained to identify and suppress research that approached sensitive topics. Papers that passed initial review but contained dangerous implications were subjected to publication delays that effectively removed them from academic circulation. The control extended into funding mechanisms that determined which research could be conducted in the first place. Grant applications were subjected to screening processes that eliminated projects likely to uncover suppressed information. Researchers who persisted in pursuing dangerous topics found their funding sources eliminated through bureaucratic procedures that appeared routine but were actually coordinated suppression efforts. The most sophisticated aspect of the system was how it turned scientific skepticism into a tool for maintaining ignorance. The rigorous standards of evidence required by legitimate science were manipulated to dismiss authentic discoveries while promoting research that supported official narratives. Anomalous findings were consistently explained away through appeals to contamination, equipment failure, or researcher error, creating an environment where extraordinary evidence was automatically suspect. Sarah revealed how the suppression system had evolved to address the challenges posed by advancing technology. As satellite imagery became more accessible to the public, image processing techniques were developed to remove or obscure evidence of Antarctic anomalies before data reached civilian channels. Internet search algorithms were modified to suppress results that might lead users towards suppressed information while promoting content that reinforced official explanations. The human cost of this suppression was staggering. Sarah described files containing thousands of researchers, whistleblowers, and journalists who had been neutralized through methods ranging from career destruction to physical elimination. The system operated according to escalating response protocols that began with professional discrediting and progressed through personal harassment, legal persecution, and ultimately more permanent solutions for individuals who couldn't be deterred through conventional means. The psychological operations supporting the cover-up had transformed public perception of Antarctica from humanity's greatest mystery into a boring, frozen wasteland that generated little curiosity or investigation. Popular culture had been carefully managed to associate Antarctic mysteries with fiction and fantasy, ensuring that anyone who claimed to have discovered evidence of advanced civilizations would be automatically dismissed as delusional or fraudulent. Sarah's revelations extended into the financial networks that supported the suppression operation. Hidden funding streams flowed through corporate structures and charitable foundations that appeared legitimate but were actually mechanisms for distributing resources to maintain the cover-up. The costs were enormous, running into billions of dollars annually, but were dispersed through so many channels that they remained invisible within normal economic analysis. The coordination required for such extensive suppression revealed the existence of governance structures that operated outside normal democratic processes. Sarah described oversight committees composed of individuals who weren't elected officials or publicly accountable administrators, but who possessed authority that transcended national boundaries. These shadow governors made decisions that affected global information flows while remaining completely hidden from public knowledge. The most disturbing aspect of Sarah's testimony was her description of how the suppression system had become self-perpetuating. The individuals operating various components of the machinery believed they were protecting humanity from information that could cause social collapse or mass panic. Their dedication to maintaining the cover-up was genuine, based on the conviction that the truth about Antarctica was too dangerous for public consumption. This created a feedback loop where each generation of suppressors was recruited from among those who had internalized the justifications for secrecy. They weren't cynical conspirators, but sincere believers in the necessity of maintaining ignorance for the greater good. Their moral conviction made them far more effective than mercenaries or coerced operatives would have been. The system had also developed mechanisms for managing the inevitable leaks and exposures that occurred despite extensive security measures. When suppressed information occasionally surfaced, rapid response teams would deploy to discredit sources, provide alternative explanations, and redirect public attention away from dangerous topics. These operations were so sophisticated that they often convinced even the original sources that they had misunderstood their own experiences. Sarah described how the internet age had both challenged and strengthened the suppression system. While digital communication made it easier for researchers to share information and coordinate investigations, it also provided new tools for monitoring and controlling information flows. Online discussions of Antarctic mysteries were subject to subtle manipulation that guided conversations away from accurate conclusions while promoting theories that were either obviously false or impossibly complex. The most insidious development was the creation of deliberate disinformation that mixed genuine, suppressed information with obvious fabrications. This poisoning of information streams ensured that anyone attempting to research Antarctic mysteries would encounter a mixture of truth and lies that made it impossible to distinguish authentic discoveries from manufactured nonsense. The result was that legitimate researchers often discredited themselves by associating with obviously false claims. Sarah's account revealed how traditional journalism had been compromised through economic and social pressures that made investigative reporting of sensitive topics nearly impossible. Media corporations depended on advertising revenue from companies that were themselves part of the suppression network. Journalists who pursued dangerous stories found their sources eliminated, their access restricted, and their employment terminated through processes that appeared to be normal business decisions. The educational system had been systematically modified to discourage the kind of critical thinking that might lead students to question official narratives about Antarctica. Curriculum guidelines emphasized acceptance of expert authority while discouraging independent investigation of controversial topics. Students learned to associate conspiracy theories with mental instability, ensuring that they would automatically dismiss evidence of genuine cover-ups as delusional thinking. The suppression machinery had also developed methods for managing the scientific community's potential response to undeniable evidence. Contingency plans existed for limited disclosure scenarios, where some Antarctic secrets might be revealed while maintaining the core deceptions. These plans involved gradually releasing selected information while carefully controlling its interpretation and implications. Sarah's most chilling revelation concerned the ultimate purpose of the suppression system. According to her analysis, the cover-up wasn't primarily designed to protect humanity from dangerous knowledge, but to maintain control over technologies and relationships that could transform human civilization. The entities inhabiting Antarctica possessed capabilities that could solve humanity's most pressing problems. But accessing this knowledge would require fundamental changes in how human societies were organized and governed. The suppression system existed to preserve existing power structures that would become obsolete if humanity gained access to Antarctic technologies and knowledge. The cover-up wasn't protection, but exploitation, keeping humanity ignorant while select groups benefited from limited access to advanced capabilities. The machinery of suppression had become a tool for maintaining inequality on a scale that dwarfed all previous forms of social control. The conversation ended with Sarah's warning that the suppression system was beginning to fail under the pressure of advancing technology and growing public skepticism. The machinery that had successfully hidden the truth for 7 decades was encountering challenges that its designers hadn't anticipated. Climate change was melting Antarctic ice at rates that might expose suppressed installations to satellite observation. The internet was enabling information sharing that bypassed traditional control mechanisms, but the failure of suppression wouldn't necessarily lead to the revelation of truth. Sarah suggested that contingency plans existed for managing uncontrolled disclosure that might involve scenarios far more destructive than continued secrecy. The machinery of suppression had become so integral to global power structures that its collapse could trigger consequences that would make the suppressed knowledge seem insignificant by comparison. As Chen drove away from the meeting, she understood that she had been given a glimpse into a shadow world where information was the ultimate weapon and ignorance was enforced through methods that would have horrified previous generations. The machinery of suppression wasn't just hiding Antarctic secrets. It was redefining the nature of truth itself in ways that challenged the foundations of democratic civilization. The satellite image that appeared on Dr. Michael Torres's screen at the National Ice Center should have been routine, just another thermal reading from the West Antarctic ice sheet as part of ongoing climate monitoring. But what Torres saw in the data made him immediately understand why his security clearance had been upgraded without explanation 3 months earlier. The ice was melting faster than any climate model predicted, and it was revealing structures that shouldn't exist according to 75 years of official Antarctic history. The warming wasn't following natural patterns, but seemed to be accelerating around specific coordinates that corresponded to locations flagged in classified databases Torres wasn't supposed to know existed. Underground heat sources were intensifying, creating melt patterns that exposed artificial structures to satellite observation for the first time since the Antarctic Treaty had established its information control protocols. Torres found himself at the center of a crisis that had been decades in the making. The same climate change that threatened coastal cities worldwide was also threatening to expose the most carefully guarded secret in human history. The ice that had hidden Antarctica's true nature was disappearing at rates that made continued suppression increasingly impossible. Every satellite pass revealed new features that contradicted the official narrative of an empty continent. The response was immediate and unprecedented. Emergency protocols that had existed only in theoretical planning documents were suddenly being implemented across multiple government agencies. Scientists with Antarctic experience were quietly reassigned to classified projects. Satellite operators received new filtering instructions that removed specific wavelengths from public data streams. The machinery of suppression was shifting into crisis mode. But the technology that had made the cover-up possible was also making its continuation increasingly difficult. Commercial satellite companies now possess imaging capabilities that rivaled military systems. Internet platforms allowed instant global distribution of information that would have taken weeks to suppress using traditional methods. Social media enabled researchers to coordinate investigations faster than suppression teams could respond. The first major breach came when a commercial satellite operated by a European space agency captured high-resolution images of geometric structures protruding from melting ice in Queen Maud Land. The images were posted online before security reviews could intercept them, creating a viral phenomenon that reached millions of viewers within hours. The standard debunking protocols failed because the evidence was too clear and the source too credible to discredit easily. Climate scientist Dr. Rebecca Martinez found herself inadvertently at the center of this growing crisis. Her research on Antarctic ice loss had been funded as part of standard climate change studies, but her models kept predicting melt patterns that revealed features the funding agencies seemed desperate to avoid acknowledging. When Martinez attempted to publish her findings, she encountered resistance that seemed entirely disproportionate to the environmental implications of her work. Martinez's breakthrough came when she realized that her climate data was revealing the heat signatures of vast underground installations that had been maintaining elevated temperatures beneath the ice for decades. The energy requirements for such systems exceeded anything that could be powered by conventional technology, suggesting either advanced human capabilities or non-human sources that weren't acknowledged in any official documentation. The warming patterns also revealed that Antarctica's underground infrastructure was far more extensive than even classified documents suggested. Martinez's thermal analysis indicated a network of interconnected facilities that spanned thousands of square miles beneath the ice. The energy signatures suggested industrial-scale operations that had been conducting activities while remaining completely hidden from public knowledge. As Martinez attempted to publish her findings, she discovered that the peer review process itself was compromised. Reviewers were rejecting her papers not because of methodological flaws, but because of security implications that weren't supposed to influence scientific publishing. The integration of national security considerations into academic research had reached a level that effectively prevented legitimate climate science from revealing inconvenient truths. The crisis deepened when indigenous weather monitoring stations began detecting atmospheric anomalies that correlated with the underground heat sources. Unusual electromagnetic fields were affecting navigation equipment across the southern hemisphere. Aircraft flying over Antarctic regions reported instrument malfunctions that suggested interference from unknown sources. The technological systems hidden beneath the ice were becoming impossible to conceal as their operations created detectable effects across vast distances. Military personnel stationed at Antarctic research facilities found themselves implementing contingency plans that had never been publicly discussed. Equipment was being moved from exposed locations to deeper underground installations. Research stations were being modified with defensive capabilities that seemed entirely inappropriate for scientific facilities. The preparations suggested that authorities were expecting challenges to their control over Antarctic operations. The most dramatic development came when civilian researchers using commercially available satellite data identified what appeared to be aircraft operations at locations that were supposed to be uninhabited wilderness. Time-lapse analysis revealed regular flight patterns that suggested routine transportation between Antarctic facilities and locations on other continents. The scope of these operations implied infrastructure and capabilities that dwarfed anything acknowledged in official Antarctic programs. Independent journalists began connecting disparate pieces of evidence that revealed the extent of hidden Antarctic activities. Flight tracking data showed regular military and private aircraft movements to coordinates that corresponded to no officially acknowledged facilities. Shipping records revealed supply operations that delivered equipment to Antarctic ports that weren't supposed to exist. Financial analysis uncovered funding streams that supported activities far beyond the scope of declared scientific research. The breakthrough moment came when a group of researchers successfully crowdfunded their own satellite monitoring system, specifically designed to observe Antarctic anomalies without government interference. Their first images revealed structures, vehicles, and activities that completely contradicted 7 decades of official narratives. The images were distributed through decentralized networks that made suppression impossible using traditional methods. The evidence was becoming overwhelming. Social media platforms are filled with satellite images, leaked documents, and whistleblower testimonies that paint a consistent picture of extensive operations involving both human agencies and non-human intelligences. The cover-up that had successfully hidden Antarctic secrets for generations was collapsing under the weight of technological progress and climate change. Government responses to these revelations revealed the desperation of authorities who had built their careers on maintaining the deception. Traditional debunking strategies failed because the evidence was too extensive and credible to dismiss. Alternative explanation campaigns collapsed because the patterns revealed by satellite data were too systematic to attribute to natural phenomena or conventional human activities. The most disturbing aspect of the emerging truth was what it revealed about the nature of governance in democratic societies. The Antarctic cover-up had required systematic deception of elected officials, scientific institutions, and public populations across multiple generations. The revelation that such extensive coordination was possible raised fundamental questions about the reality of democratic control over government operations. International relations were strained as different nations attempted to manage the crisis according to their own interests. The Antarctic Treaty system that had maintained global cooperation in suppressing the truth was fracturing as member nations pursued independent strategies for dealing with disclosure. Some countries began preparing their populations for revelations, while others intensified their suppression efforts. The non-human entities that had been the subject of the cover-up began responding to the changing situation in ways that suggested they had been monitoring human information control efforts and were prepared for eventual disclosure. Sightings of unconventional aircraft increased dramatically around the world. Communication attempts were detected using technologies that exceeded human capabilities but seemed designed to be accessible to human understanding. The melting ice was revealing archaeological sites that provided undeniable evidence of advanced civilizations that had existed in Antarctica for thousands of years. Structures were emerging from the ice that demonstrated engineering capabilities far beyond anything in recorded human history. The artifacts being exposed included technologies that could revolutionize human understanding of physics, energy, and materials science. But the most significant revelation was that the entities inhabiting Antarctica had been actively involved in human development for millennia. Evidence suggested that technological advances, scientific breakthroughs, and cultural developments throughout human history had been influenced by knowledge and guidance from intelligences that had remained hidden while shaping the course of human civilization. The implications were staggering. Humanity's understanding of its own development, its place in the universe, and its relationship with other forms of intelligence required complete revision. The species that had believed itself to be alone in the cosmos had actually been part of a larger community of intelligences that included beings whose capabilities and knowledge far exceeded anything in human experience. The cover-up had prevented humanity from understanding its true situation for generations, maintaining ignorance that had stunted development and perpetuated conflicts that could have been avoided through access to advanced knowledge and technologies. The revelation of Antarctic secrets wasn't just exposing hidden activities. It was revealing that human potential had been artificially constrained by those who benefited from maintaining ignorance and technological limitation. As the ice continued melting and the truth continued emerging, humanity faced a choice that would determine its future development. The knowledge and technologies hidden in Antarctica could solve virtually every challenge facing human civilization. Energy scarcity, environmental degradation, disease, poverty, and conflict could all be addressed using capabilities that had been accessible but deliberately withheld. But accessing this knowledge would require abandoning the power structures and belief systems that had dominated human civilization for centuries. The entities revealing themselves weren't offering simple technological gifts, but were presenting opportunities for fundamental transformation that would require humanity to evolve beyond its current limitations and embrace its role as a conscious participant in a larger cosmic community. The melting truth of Antarctica represented more than the exposure of historical deception. It was humanity's invitation to join intelligences that had been waiting patiently for the species to mature enough to handle knowledge that could transform Earth into a world worthy of its true potential. The question was whether humanity would prove ready for such a transformation, or would choose to remain trapped in the limitations that ignorance and fear had imposed for far too long.